Pavlov, after all, made some extremely profound observations, both on animals and on human beings. And he found, among other things, that conditioning techniques applied to animals or humans in a state either of psychological or physical stress sank in, so to say, very deeply into the mind body of the creature and were extremely difficult to get rid of, that they seem to be embedded more deeply than other forms of conditioning. We now know the reason why these techniques worked, and there is no doubt at all that we can, if we want to, carry them much further than was possible in the past. And of course, in the recent history of brainwashing, both as applied to prisoners of war and to the lower personnel within the Communist Party in China, we see that the Pavlovian methods have been applied systematically and evidently with extraordinary efficacy. I mean, I think there can be no doubt that by the application of these methods, a very large army of totally devoted people has been created. The conditioning has been driven in, so to say, by a kind of psychological iontophoresis into the very depth of the people's being, and has got so deep that it's very difficult for it ever to be rooted out.
The human brain cannot survive indefinitely in a state of high anxiety and existential dread. Whether such a state comes about organically or it's produced artificially, our response is the same. We seek out a defense mechanism to escape the cognitive dissonance and restore our sense of equilibrium. Historically, totalitarian leaders have stepped into this vacuum, not just with policy, but with a grand narrative that recasts its citizens from helpless victims into heroic participants in a cosmic drama, simultaneously scapegoating a target group as saboteurs, parasites, or subhumans who threaten the collective. Once we accept that lifeline, our own neurochemical machinery goes to work to protect that sense of security and pride at any cost, even if it means altering reality itself. When dynamic leaders like Hitler, Stalin, or Mao took power, they didn't just impose their will through raw physical force. They offered a psychological lifeline to a deeply traumatized, humiliated citizenry in a state of psychological crisis. The thunderous applause heard at mass rallies in Nuremberg, Moscow, or Beijing was an expression of deep, authentic relief, applauding the entity that took away their shame, their economic terror, and their existential isolation. Today, it has only become easier for leadership to advance authoritarian agendas thanks to the internet, social media algorithms, and the arrival of identity politics. The extreme degree of polarization we're seeing today has less to do with actual policy than it has to do with a highly sophisticated delivery apparatus and our own neurochemical reward system. Digital platforms are designed to keep us scrolling with a feedback loop of identity reinforcement. Tweets, retweets, likes, hypes, and outrage-inducing headlines from our political tribe act as the intermittent rewards. Our brains become chemically dependent on the validation of the in-group, driving us to seek out more extreme content to sustain it. Media outlets and politicians convince voters that if the out-group wins, their entire way of life will be destroyed. The brain's ancient threat detection hardware is hijacked by chemical feedback loops, consisting of 24-hour news cycles and algorithms, creating a state of perpetual AI-mediated neurochemical panic. Opposing sides don't just disagree with each other, they actively despise or even fear one another. In this state of neurochemical addiction, we're far more likely to embrace overreaching, authoritarian policy. Since Dr. Kimberly Young's 1998 foundational book, Caught in the Net, which tracked internet overuse, there have been many studies demonstrating similar findings. Such findings have included showing that social media algorithms train adolescent brains to become chronically dependent on digital social validation, similarly to substance addiction, and that severe social media addiction is associated with reduced gray matter volume in the bilateral amygdala, and that over time, control in the prefrontal cortex can degrade, shifting behavior from a voluntary choice to a compulsive habit. All three phases of the Facebook study, including the 2021 whistleblower documents, show that Facebook's algorithms amplify societal division. Driven by a business model that prioritizes engagement through toxicity, particularly harming vulnerable demographics such as teenagers. In 2026, the largest long-term study of brain development in U.S. history began. While still ongoing, the findings of this study, dubbed the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, has already discovered a vital distinction. That total screen time is not so much the enemy as specific platform addiction is. Compulsive use of algorithm-heavy smartphone feeds and social media platforms, rather than passive television or video gaming, is what actively disrupts sleep architecture, degrades the prefrontal cortex, and spikes pediatric depressive disorders. While this is far more sophisticated than the techniques used on Americans in the infancy of public relations, the old version was pretty impressive in itself. Ed Bernays, one of the founding fathers of public relations, made a career out of exploiting human irrational thinking and our capacity to distort reality to protect and to stroke our egos. By applying Sigmund Freud's theories pertaining to irrational subconscious human desires, Bernays became famous for all manner of PR campaigns, from currying favor for the U.S. and President Wilson at the Versailles Treaty, to getting women to embrace the good life by smoking so-called torches of freedom. Bernays was also infamously behind the overthrow of the democratically elected Guatemalan government in 1954. In his 1971 book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, B.F. Skinner argued that free will was hindering the creating of a perfect society, a utopia, and that scientific methods to modify behavior, or what he called cultural engineering, were necessary to complete the task. Decades earlier, in his 1948 utopian novel, Walden 2, Skinner had also espoused behavior modification and a rejection of free will. Today, one could point to many facets of our culture that indicate much of Skinner's vision has become a reality, including the widespread normalization of pharmacological management, SSRIs, ADHD meds, anxiolytics, and recreational sedation. But there have also been many who sounded the proverbial alarm bells regarding such psychological manipulation. In a 1962 speech at UC Berkeley, Aldous Huxley described a coming stage of social evolution in which rulers would perfect the art of making people love their servitude. He called this the final or ultimate revolution. In this stage, control operates not against people's desires, but through them, by shaping what they desire, by satisfying the nervous system instead of the conscience. In the speech, Huxley predicts that entertainment technologies will evolve into mechanisms of social control. People wouldn't be silenced, they would simply be too amused to care. Neil Postman later captured this in Amusing Ourselves to Death in 1985, in which he wrote, "Orwell feared those who would ban books. Huxley feared there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one." In what he calls A Prison Without Walls, Huxley describes a citizenry distracted from freedom by the pursuit of comfort, pleasure, and emotional validation. When people are entertained, comfortable, and emotionally managed, they cease to care about tyranny because they're no longer able to recognize it. In the same talk, Huxley also mentions Pavlovian conditioning and its already successful use in China, as well as the fact that such conditioning is very difficult to reverse once it's in place. Just 10 years prior to that, Nobel laureate Bertrand Russell described this very well in his 1952 classic, The Impact of Science on Society. What is essential in mass psychology is the art of persuasion. If you compare a speech of Hitler's with a speech of Edmund Burke, you will see what strides have been made in the art since the 18th century. What went wrong formerly was that people had read in books that man is a rational animal and framed their arguments on this hypothesis. We now know that limelight and a brass band do more to persuade than can be done by the most elegant train of syllogisms. Hannah Arendt, who is one of the most influential political theorists of the 20th century, similarly emphasized in her work how totalitarian leaders flood the public sphere with conflicting, manipulative, and sensational information so that citizens can no longer discern what is true, or even care what is true. The term flood of contradictory information didn't simply mean fake news. For Arendt, the term meant a systemic confusion of the factual world. One story contradicting another, official narratives shifting constantly until facticity itself loses stability. Totalitarian propaganda, she argued, aimed not so much to make people believe one story, but to make them believe nothing, so they could be made to believe anything. Arendt saw this not as an aberration, but as a new form of politics, rule through epistemic instability. In this epistemic vacuum, the distinction between truth and fiction finally collapses. This creates a social condition where anything can be believed and nothing can be verified, an ideal environment for totalitarian movements. Today, PR has evolved exponentially and now includes social media silos with an algorithmic bias towards conflict, allowing citizenry to live in completely different factual universes. Psychologist Irvin Staub has shown in his research how coping mechanisms can act as an accelerant for violence, involving scapegoating and devaluing a certain target group as inferior, dangerous, or out of step with moral obligation. Staub's most famous concept, the continuum of destruction, shows how this can lead to societal violence through a series of small, incremental steps, beginning with minor acts of discrimination or hostility that go unpunished, followed by a psychological shift which allows for further escalation. Small but increasing acts of harm make larger acts of violence more conceivable and eventually acceptable. Eventually, we find ourselves saying, "They deserved it," or "We had no choice." In closing, the human brain is wired with an evolutionary bias that prioritizes ego protection over the conscience and rational thought. If an out-group is framed as a threat to your way of life by a source deemed credible and reliable, our subconscious requires of us that we despise this group to protect our egos. Because the subconscious filters out the overwhelming majority of incoming data to fit its existing worldview, the rational mind is rarely given objective facts to work with. Moreover, we get a hit of dopamine when we find information that proves us right or provides identity reinforcement. Once the subconscious decides the other side is dangerous, the conscious mind goes to work inventing logical justifications for hating them. This is why presenting people with objective facts rarely changes their minds. The rational brain is just defending a subconscious, ego-driven choice. It feels natural because that's what we've always done, so no one ever talks about it. Maybe we should.